They say a mother's love is unconditional, but what they don't tell you is that even unconditional love can be exhausted. When my daughter told me she'd handed over my country house, the one I built with my own hands, the one where her father took his last breath, to her husband's family, she didn't even look ashamed. She said it like it was a done deal, like I didn't matter. "You don't really go there anymore," she said, smiling as if she were doing me a favor. I smiled too, because what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd already made my move. This isn't a tale of confrontation. It's a story of quiet reclamation, of a mother who stopped being silent and started being sovereign. So when they showed up to take what wasn't theirs, they found something unexpected. Not resistance, not anger, just a boundary they never saw coming. There was a time when the silence of the countryside felt like music to me, not empty, not lonely, just still. The kind of stillness that holds memories like pressed flowers in a book. That's what the house was, a living journal of every season my life had weathered. Robert and I found the land by accident. A wrong turn on a rainy Tuesday led us to that hilltop where wild daisies swayed like they were welcoming us home. We didn't have a plan, just a question. What if we built something here? That question became foundation posts, hand-mixed cement and nights under a tarp with sandwiches and laughter and sore backs. We didn't hire anyone. We didn't trust anyone to touch what we were building, not just a house, but our future. I was 32, sunburned and alive. Robert was steady. Hands that knew both blueprints and lullabies. He taught shop class at the high school, came home with sawdust in his hair, and kissed me like every day was borrowed time. I never asked why he always worked so hard. I knew. He wanted Marianne to have something that couldn't be taken away. Roots, walls that could hold her laughter, windows that would frame her growing up. The year we finished the house, Marianne was born in a storm. No time for a hospital, just me, Robert, and a blanket in the master bedroom. I remember his voice in my ear, calm and sure, saying, "You're doing just fine, Elle. She's coming home." And she did. Those walls heard her first cry. That porch held her first steps. That backyard watched her chase fireflies in pink pajamas, her giggles mixing with cicadas and dusk. We didn't have money for fancy things, but we had stories. We had Sunday pancakes and Tuesday night card games. Robert used to read to us by lantern when the power went out. Marianne loved fairy tales, but always asked why the mothers in those stories disappeared. I used to tell her, the best mothers don't disappear, they just become part of the walls. And I meant it. I became part of that house, its breath, its warmth, its silence. Even after Robert passed, I stayed. Repainting the shutters, mending the stairs, talking to the wind like it was him. I thought Marianne understood that. I thought she'd remember what we built. Marianne never really asked about the house, not after Robert passed. She'd call from the city. Her voice always clipped and rushed, talking about meetings, brunches, or her husband Gregory's latest business venture. I tried not to mind. Children grow. They change. That's what people say, right? But what they don't say is how much it hurts when the laughter that once echoed through your halls turns into silence. That spring, she called and invited me to brunch in the city. "Just us," she said, as if that made up for the months of absence. I wore the blue dress Robert always liked, the one with little daisies at the hem. Silly, maybe, but I wanted to feel seen, wanted to believe I still mattered. The restaurant was loud, all steel and marble. I felt like a ghost among influencers. Marianne was already seated, barely looked up when I arrived. Her lipstick was perfect. Her eyes tired. She talked for a while about nothing. Gregory's promotion, a new Pilates studio, and then leaned in. Her voice softened, like she was comforting me before a blow. "I've decided to give the house to Gregory's parents. They need a place. It just makes sense, Mom. You're not really using it anymore." I blinked. Not once. Twice. She kept smiling, like it was a favor. "It's theirs now," she added, reaching for her mimosa. "You have no right to go back." I stared at the bubbles rising in her glass, trying to hear through the ringing in my ears. No right. No right? I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled. the way I'd learned to. Small, quiet, empty. Because what Marianne didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the house was no longer hers to give. After that brunch, I drove home with a storm in my chest. The city melted away behind me, replaced by the familiar winding road leading to the country house I had built with Robert. It wasn't just a place, it was every memory we had created together. Every late night, every scraped knee, every whispered, "I love you" in the dark. And now Marianne wanted to give it away like it was just another possession, like it belonged to her to do whatever she pleased. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, watching the house through the windshield. The sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, and for a second, I allowed myself to feel the grief all over again. Not just for the loss of Robert, but for the loss of the family I thought I had. But grief, as I've learned, can be a quiet teacher. It doesn't always scream and tear you apart. Sometimes it whispers, urging you to hold on, to protect what's sacred. Marianne had grown up chasing her dreams, slipping further away with each passing year. I wanted to believe that beneath her polished exterior was still the little girl who ran barefoot through the garden, the one who begged me for bedtime stories. But the woman sitting across from me that day was a stranger, wrapped in designer clothes and entitlement. I spent that night walking through the rooms, touching the worn banister Robert had sanded by hand, running my fingers over the wallpaper Helen had chosen. I remembered the blizzard when Marianne was born right here in the master bedroom, how we couldn't make it to the hospital in time. That house was the sum of every joy and every heartache. The following morning, I called Eli Manning, my oldest friend and former foreman back in our contracting days. He was blunt as always. "You knew this was coming, Ellie. You let her think everything was hers." He was right. I had been silent too long, hoping my daughter would see the value of what she was about to lose. But sometimes, hope is just a faint flicker in a dark room. That afternoon, I met with a buyer, a couple from our hometown, the Whitakers. I knew them well. They understood what the house meant, not just in dollars, but in dignity. The woman, Janine Whitaker, had once been friends with Marianne's ex-best friend, Lena. Their bitter business fallout was the talk of the town, a reminder that trust can shatter in an instant. I didn't sell the house to hurt Marianne. I sold it because I was tired of being invisible in my own family, because boundaries matter, even when they're painful. When the Whitakers moved in earlier than expected, I didn't make a scene. I changed the locks, arranged security, and let the silence settle over the property like a shield. 2 days later, Marianne called again, panic in her voice. "There are people in the house, Mom. Jared's parents are here and they won't let us in." I told her calmly, "That's because the house isn't yours anymore. I sold it months ago." She was furious, but I didn't waver. This wasn't about power. It was about respect. As I hung up the phone, I realized something profound. Sometimes loving your child means standing firm, even when it hurts the most. The city was a different world from the quiet country roads I'd grown used to. Glass towers and honking cars replaced the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Yet here I was, walking into a trendy cafe where Marianne had invited me for brunch. The same place where she had dropped the bombshell about the house. I sat across from her, trying to read the woman who once was my little girl. She wore a sharp blazer, her hair perfectly styled, and eyes guarded like a fortress. Her mimosa sat untouched, but her fingers tapped anxiously on the marble table. The air between us was thick with words unspoken. "You're not really using the house anymore," Marianne said again, as if rehearsing her earlier line. "Gregory's parents need a place to settle. It's just practical." I nodded slowly, remembering the house as it used to be, filled with laughter, love, and a sense of belonging. But now it felt like a liability in her carefully curated life, a relic she was eager to trade away for convenience and status. As Marianne spoke, I caught a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a crack in the armor. Was she trying to convince herself more than me? I chose my words carefully. "Do you remember the night you were born, the blizzard that kept us from the hospital?" She looked away, a shadow crossing her face. "That house isn't just wood and nails, Marianne. It's our story. Your father's legacy. It's where you took your first steps, where you learned to dream. She sighed, her smile tight. I know, Mom, but things change. I wanted to scream, to tell her she was wrong, but instead, I stayed silent. My silence was not weakness. It was a quiet storm gathering strength. Later that night, I found something that shook me, a small camera hidden behind a bookshelf in the living room. Someone had been watching the house, monitoring my every move. The paranoia settled in, but so did clarity. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about control. I called Eli. They're watching me, Eli. He didn't hesitate. It's time to stop being the silent one, Ellie. Time to set boundaries. That night, I made a decision. The house was more than memories. It was a message. The following days felt like walking through a fog. Marianne's decision echoed in my mind, growing louder with each passing hour. How could the person I raised, the little girl who once clung to my hand, dismiss everything with such cold finality? The house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the fabric of our family, woven with love, sacrifice, and time. But silence had been my companion for so long. I had hoped that love alone would protect what mattered. I was wrong. I reached out to Eli Manning, my steadfast friend and the man who had helped me build that house years ago. Over the phone, his voice was firm. Ellie, you have to take control. Silence is giving them power. His words struck a chord. I had been quiet, hoping to preserve peace. But peace without boundaries is just a powder keg waiting to explode. I decided to visit the house, to walk through every room, to breathe life back into the memories. The creak of the floorboards, the faded wallpaper, the faint scent of Helen's favorite jasmine perfume, all reminders of a life once full. At the local hardware store, I asked about security cameras and changed the locks myself. It wasn't paranoia, it was protection. The house belonged to me, in every way that mattered. Meanwhile, Marianne called less frequently. When she did, her voice was clipped, distant. The gap between us widened with every unanswered question, every avoided conversation. One evening, Gregory showed up unexpectedly at my door, trying to negotiate. Ellie, this isn't necessary. Marianne's just trying to do what's best. I looked him in the eye and said quietly, what's best is respecting boundaries, Gregory. This house isn't a bargaining chip. He left without another word. That night, I sat on the porch swing, the cool air wrapping around me. The house was silent again, but this time I felt a spark of strength. Silence wasn't surrender anymore. It was a shield. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Marianne and me remained an unspoken weight. I watched as she built a life miles away, a life that seemed to thrive on the very absence of what we had. I wondered if she remembered the nights she curled up in the living room, clutching her favorite blanket, while Robert read stories by lantern light. One afternoon, I received a call from the local realtor. Ellie, there's interest in the house. A couple from your hometown, the Whitakers, would like to see it. At first, I hesitated. Selling the house felt like admitting defeat. But then I thought of the Whitakers, Steve, a retired electrician with hands as steady as Robert's, and Janine, an art teacher with a gentle smile and deep respect for history. They weren't just buyers, they were keepers of stories. I arranged to meet them at the house. As we walked through each room, I saw the reverence in their eyes. Janine touched the windowsills tenderly, whispering, "This feels like home." Steve nodded, his hands running over the banister. They understood what the house represented, not just a building, but a legacy. I made the decision. Quietly, without fanfare, I signed the papers. It was a peaceful handoff, a passing of the torch to those who would cherish the home as much as I had. But Marianne didn't know. She thought the house was still hers to give. When the Whitakers moved in earlier than expected, Gregory called in a panic. "Ellie, they're there. They won't let us in." I replied calmly, "That's because the house is no longer yours. It belongs to people who see its soul." The confrontation that followed was loud, angry, but I stood firm, no longer silent, no longer invisible. The papers lay thick on my kitchen table, a testament to battles fought in silence and signatures that held more power than any shouted word. Marianne's sudden entitlement over the house was rooted in a stack of legal documents she flaunted like a trophy. But what she didn't know was that those papers had been carefully rewritten long before she stepped into that cafe to declare her ownership. Years ago, when Robert was still alive, he insisted on keeping things clear. We had entrusted the house to me, but there was a clause, one that quietly stripped any future claim from anyone who didn't honor the memory within those walls. Marianne had signed papers I never fully explained, and I had kept the original versions hidden, tucked safely away. Gregory tried to use those documents to force me out, but I had a secret weapon. Eli Manning, my oldest friend and a man who understood the weight of building something with your hands, stood by my side. Together, we tracked down the original deeds, the true ownership, and the amendments Robert had insisted on. The legalese was daunting, but the message was clear. The house belonged to me, and not a single soul had the right to give it away without my consent. I met with a lawyer, a quiet woman who seemed to carry the strength of generations in her gaze. To my surprise, she revealed she was the granddaughter of Helen's best friend, the woman who had taught me to plant roses in the garden. She understood what the house meant, and she fought tirelessly on my behalf. Meanwhile, Marianne's patience wore thin. Rumors of lawsuits and disputes spread like wildfire. She tried to rally support, but those who knew the truth stood with me. The house was not a prize to be won. It was a legacy to be protected. I held on to the memories as tightly as the deeds, knowing that every nail hammered and every board laid was a testament to love and resilience. The house was more than a building. It was my voice, finally heard. The legal battle wasn't loud or public at first. It was a quiet tug-of-war played out behind closed doors, in offices filled with stacks of paperwork and hushed phone calls. Marianne was relentless, armed with copies of documents and confident in her claim. But what she didn't realize was how deeply rooted the house was in my past, and how fiercely I was willing to protect it. Eli became my steadfast ally. He helped me sift through decades of records, searching for every signature, every clause that could turn the tide. We discovered that years ago, before Marianne had even graduated high school, Robert had inserted a clause in the deed, a safeguard against anyone treating the house as a mere asset. This clause required unanimous consent before any transfer of ownership could be valid. I had the original documents safely hidden away, while Marianne only had copies, unaware of the full legal picture. Our lawyer, Ms. Harper, was a quiet force. She listened intently as I recounted the story of the house, the blood, sweat, and tears that had built it. Her connection to my late husband's past gave her an unspoken understanding of the stakes. She fought tirelessly, filing motions and attending hearings that seemed endless. Meanwhile, Marianne's frustration grew. She reached out to family members, trying to rally support against me, painting me as a stubborn relic clinging to the past. But those who truly knew the story, friends of Robert, neighbors, even some of Marianne's old classmates, stood firmly by my side. The strain of the dispute wore heavily on both of us. Marianne's calls became less frequent, her tone colder, as if the daughter I once knew was slipping further away. I found myself reflecting on the little girl who used to chase butterflies in the garden, whose laughter filled the very rooms we now fought over. One afternoon, I received a surprising call from Lena Foster, Marianne's ex-best friend and now estranged rival. The wounds between them were deep, but Lena's voice was gentle as she said, "Ellie, I just wanted you to know I'm on your side. That house deserves to be loved, not used." Her words reminded me that sometimes the people you least expect become your strongest supporters. As the legal process unfolded, I realized that this fight was about more than just a house. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my place in a family that seemed determined to erase me. The house wasn't just property. It was a testament to a life lived with purpose, love, and unwavering strength. And I wasn't about to let anyone take that away. The days grew heavier with every phone call and every letter I received. Marianne's legal team pushed harder, trying to find loopholes, but I was no longer alone. Eli, steadfast and loyal, was at my side every step of the way, reminding me of the value of the fight. One afternoon, as I sat sorting through old photographs, I found a faded letter from Robert. His handwriting shaky but clear. He had written about his hopes for the house, about the family he dreamed we'd always be. The letter became my anchor, a reminder of what truly mattered. Then came the unexpected twist. During a court hearing, Marianne's lawyer presented a piece of evidence, a contract that, on the surface, seemed to grant Marianne full rights. But Eli and I had anticipated this. The contract was a copy, missing critical annotations and signatures that made it void. Our lawyer, Ms. Harper, unveiled the original documents. She highlighted the clauses that protected the house from being treated as a mere asset to be traded. The courtroom fell silent as the judge examined the papers. The ruling was clear. The house belonged to me, Eleanor Cole, with full rights to decide its future. Marianne's claim was dismissed. Though the legal victory was mine, the personal toll was undeniable. Marianne was not present in the courtroom. Our family was fractured, the bonds stretched thin by years of misunderstanding and hurt. But in that moment, as I held the judge's decision, I felt a wave of peace. This house, our home, was safe, not just physically, but spiritually. Later, Eli and I visited the house together. We walked through every room, each one echoing with memories and the promise of new beginnings. I realized then that protecting the house wasn't just about ownership. It was about reclaiming my identity, my voice, and my right to be seen. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I was ready to face it, with strength, grace, and the knowledge that some legacies are worth fighting for. The morning the Whitakers arrived, the sun cast a gentle glow over the country house, illuminating the fresh coat of paint and the newly planted daisies along the porch. It was a new beginning, not just for them, but for the house itself. The home that had once been my sanctuary was finally finding peace in the hands of those who truly respected its history. I watched from a distance as Steve Whitaker, with his grease-stained hands and kind eyes, inspected the electrical system. Janine, delicate but determined, wandered through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the windowsills as if trying to absorb the memories. They moved with reverence, speaking softly about how they planned to restore the attic and preserve the old garden. News traveled fast in small towns, and soon enough, Marianne and Gregory showed up. They came with a sense of entitlement, expecting to waltz back into a home they believed was theirs by right. But the look on their faces when they were stopped at the gate was priceless, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and frustration. The security guard, firm but polite, explained the new ownership. Marianne's protests fell on deaf ears. The Whitakers had the legal papers, the deed in hand, and the blessing of the court. There was nothing left to argue. From my porch, I watched as Marianne's anger simmered into desperation. She made calls, tried to rally support from family and friends, but the tide had turned. The house was no longer a pawn in her game. That evening, Marianne called me again, her voice trembling. "Mom, this isn't right. They can't just push us out like this." I answered calmly, "The house chose who it belongs to, Marianne, and it chose respect." She was silent for a moment, then whispered, "You embarrassed us." I smiled softly. "No, Marianne, you did that yourself." In that moment, I realized that the house wasn't just a building. It was a mirror, reflecting the true nature of those who tried to claim it. And sometimes, the strongest walls aren't made of wood and stone. They're made of boundaries that can't be crossed. Marianne's fury didn't subside after that first confrontation. Instead, it morphed into something colder, strategic, calculated. She started gathering allies, calling relatives and old family friends, painting herself as the victim of an unforgiving mother who had betrayed her. Social media buzzed with vague posts hinting at family drama, and whispers traveled faster than the morning fog. but I refused to engage in petty battles. My silence became my armor once more. I watched from afar as Marianne's world began to unravel piece by piece. Her husband Gregory, once a quiet partner, grew increasingly agitated, his patience thinning. Their in-laws whispered doubts about the wisdom of their move, their expectations dashed against the reality of locked gates and legal boundaries. Meanwhile, the Whitakers settled in with care and respect. Janine planted wildflowers in the garden, bringing color and life back to the yard. Steve fixed the creaky porch steps and restored the old attic, uncovering forgotten treasures like Robert's worn toolbox and a box of letters tied with a faded ribbon. I often visited the house during this time, feeling the warmth return with every step. It was no longer just my home. It was a place of healing, not only for me, but for the Whitakers and perhaps for the memory of what once was. One evening, Marianne showed up unannounced at my doorstep. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She didn't come with anger this time, only a fragile plea. "Mom, why did you do this? Why sell the house to people you know I can't stand?" I looked at her calmly, my voice steady. "Because they love it. Because they see what it means. Because this house deserves more than power plays." She faltered, the fight draining from her. For a moment, I saw the little girl I once knew, the one who used to beg for bedtime stories and chase fireflies. But that moment was fleeting. Marianne turned away and whispered, "You made me look like a fool." I didn't respond. Sometimes words aren't necessary. The words, "You made me look like a fool," hung in the air like a fragile glass ornament ready to shatter. Marianne's shoulders sagged, the weight of her own choices bearing down on her. For a moment I wanted to reach out, to cradle the daughter I once held close on sleepless nights. But I knew better now. "This house," I said softly, "was never about games or pride. It was about legacy and love, something you lost sight of long ago." She spun around, anger flashing in her eyes once more. "I'm your daughter. How could you do this to me? To our family?" Her voice cracked, but there was no pleading, only a demand for loyalty she felt was owed. I took a deep breath, feeling the years of silence and sacrifice rise up inside me. "I loved you enough to let you go," I replied, "but I won't let you trample over everything I built just to feed your ego." Her lip trembled, but she masked it with a bitter laugh. "You sold my home to the people I can't stand. You chose them over me." "I chose respect," I said, stepping closer. "I chose a home that holds memories, not a battlefield." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. Marianne looked smaller somehow, not the towering figure who once ruled our lives with a sharp tongue and sharper ambitions, but a frightened woman facing the consequences of her own actions. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. "You embarrassed us," she whispered. I shook my head slowly. "You did that all by yourself. This isn't about embarrassment. It's about boundaries. Something you never learned to respect." The fight drained from her posture, replaced by a strange mixture of sorrow and understanding. She glanced around, eyes landing on a faded photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she asked quietly. "Because you wouldn't have heard it," I answered honestly. "Not when the truth wasn't what you wanted." She wiped at her eyes, anger turning inward. "Do you even care what this has done to me? To my marriage?" I wanted to reach out, to comfort, but the years of hurt made my heart cautious. "I care that it had to come to this," I said slowly, "but I don't regret it." A long pause followed, before the distant rumble of a truck pulling up broke the tension. Eli was home. He walked in quietly, eyeing the tense scene before him. "Well," he said with a wry grin, "that went better than I expected." Marianne glared. "Your sidekick's here to gloat." Eli chuckled, undeterred. "I'm here to make sure Ellie doesn't end up on the 6 o'clock news. You look like you're about to throw something." She spun on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor. I stood there, breathing deeply, feeling the quiet settle like a balm. The battle was far from over, but I had drawn the line. Sometimes loving someone means walking away from the version of them that no longer exists. The days that followed Marianne's departure were heavy with silence, but inside, a storm was raging. The anger she carried was palpable, but beneath it, I sensed a sorrow she could never quite admit. It was the kind of grief that masquerades as fury, the pain of a daughter who felt abandoned, yet refused to see the boundaries she had crossed. Eli stopped by one afternoon, his familiar presence a comforting anchor. "You know," he said, cracking open a soda on the porch, "I've seen a lot of storms in my life, but this one feels different. It's not just about the house, it's about the family that once was." I nodded, staring out at the garden where Marianne once played. She's not the little girl anymore, and I'm not the woman who'll let her trample over everything I've built. The truth was, I was exhausted. Exhausted from years of silence, from swallowing my pride, from hoping that love alone could bridge the growing gap between us. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's a razor that cuts deeper every time. That evening, Marianne called again. Her voice was quieter, less confrontational, but still edged with frustration. "Mom, you don't understand what this has done to me, to my marriage, to my life." I wanted to comfort her, to offer a soft word, but I held firm. I care that it had to come to this, but I won't apologize for protecting what's mine. She sighed, the sound heavy with defeat. "I just wish things could have been different." So did I. Later, Eli and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. "You did what you had to do," he said simply. "Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing a person can do." And in that quiet moment, I felt a flicker of peace, a small light in the darkness, because sometimes the hardest battles are fought not with anger, but with grace. The tension between Marianne and me settled into a quiet ache that seemed to stretch endlessly. I spent many mornings sitting on the porch, sipping coffee and letting the world wake up slowly around me, all while my mind raced with memories and unspoken words. One day a letter arrived, not from Marianne, but from Lena Foster, the woman who had once been Marianne's closest friend and later her fiercest rival. The letter was unexpected, handwritten in neat cursive, carrying the weight of shared history and silent understanding. "Ellie," it began, "I know things between Marianne and you are broken, but I wanted you to know that I see your pain and I respect your strength. The house means more than just walls and floors. It's a testament to your life and love." Lena's words struck a chord deep within me. Despite the betrayal and the fractures in our family, there were still those who recognized the true value of what I had built. Marianne, meanwhile, had become a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her calls were less frequent, and when they came, they carried a note of hesitation. I sensed she was grappling with regret, though pride kept her from admitting it. One evening, Eli stopped by with news. "There's been talk in town," and he said. "People are beginning to see the story differently. They're siding with you, Ellie. They see the house for what it really is." The shift was subtle but significant. Neighbors who had remained silent started offering support. Old friends of Robert's reached out with words of encouragement. Even some distant relatives expressed their respect for the stand I had taken. Yet the hardest part was still the silence from Marianne. I wondered if she ever thought about the house not as a possession, but as a symbol of a mother's love and sacrifice. As I stood by the garden one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky, I whispered a silent hope that someday Marianne would find her way back, not just to the house, but to the family we once were. And perhaps in that journey, we could find healing. I hadn't expected a letter from Marianne, but when it arrived, the envelope was thin, the handwriting careful and distant, almost like a stranger had penned it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a thank you. It was 3 sentences scribbled across an expensive stationery card. "I found the photo, the one of me and Dad in the garden. I remember that day. I thought you should know." No signature, no return address. But I recognized the effort it must have taken her to write even that. I pinned the note on the fridge, beside Robert's old photo from our wedding and a dried daisy from the first bouquet he ever gave me. I stood there a while, breathing in memories and exhaling forgiveness I hadn't known I still had in me. That weekend, I visited the house, not to linger, just to see. The Whitakers had installed new shutters, bright green, cheerful against the cream siding. Steve waved from the garage, hands stained with paint. Janine was pruning rose bushes, humming softly to herself. "This place is alive again," she said, smiling up at me. "It breathes differently now, like it's exhaled." I nodded, overwhelmed with quiet joy. It always needed someone to listen. She paused. "You know, Marianne came by. Didn't come in, just stood by the mailbox for a while. I didn't ask what she looked like or what she said. I didn't need to. The fact that she had returned, even for a moment, meant more than she could understand. As I drove back, the fields danced in the wind, gold and green like a living memory. I thought about everything we'd lost, everything we'd survived, and how somehow we'd found something new in the ashes. Later that night, Eli brought over a bottle of whiskey. We sat on the porch like we always did, two old souls bearing witness to the passage of time. "You ever think she'll come back?" he asked. I took a sip, feeling the burn settle deep in my chest. Maybe, but if she does, it has to be because she wants to heal, not because she wants to win. He nodded. Boundaries don't mean love's gone. They just mean love learned to protect itself. The stars came out slowly, one by one, like memories returning home. And for the first time in years, I let the quiet wrap around me, not as a punishment, but as peace. It had been weeks since I last heard from Marianne, and yet, in the quiet rhythm of my new mornings, I no longer waited. There was a strange freedom in letting go, not of love, but of expectation. I had done what I needed to do. I had chosen peace, and for once, peace had stayed. Then one morning, a small envelope arrived again. No note this time, just a photograph. It was of the garden in spring, wildflowers blooming in a soft tangle of colors, sunlight catching on Marianne's hair as she knelt beside Robert, their hands muddy, both laughing. On the back, in the same slanted handwriting, were just 3 words, "I remember too." It stopped me, right there in the doorway, mail still clutched in my hand. I leaned against the frame and let the tears come. Quiet, steady, full of release. That was all I had ever needed from her. Not an apology, not even a conversation, just recognition, just memory. That evening, I placed the photo on the fridge beside the note she'd sent earlier. A collage of what once was, a quiet testament to what might still be. Eli stopped by later. He didn't ask what was new. He never needed to. "She remembered," I said simply. He nodded, pouring us both a drink. Funny thing about memory. It's not always the wound. It can be the salve, too. We sat on the porch again, as we always did, watching the horizon soften into dusk. The neighborhood kids rode their bikes past us, yelling and laughing. Someone down the block was grilling, and the air smelled like charcoal and rosemary. Life didn't pause for grief. It didn't apologize for its speed. But sometimes, just sometimes, it circled back, offering grace in the shape of a small envelope and a photograph that reminded you of who you used to be. I didn't know if Marianne would ever come back fully. Not to the house, but to herself, to me. But I had stopped holding my breath. That was the gift of boundaries. They didn't promise reconciliation. They promised clarity. And clarity, I had learned, was sometimes the most loving thing we could give to each other. A few days later, I received a voicemail from Marianne. Her voice was quieter now, less of the polished edge, more of the hesitation I remembered from when she was a teenager, calling home late after curfew. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just said, "I saw the garden. It looks like you've been taking care of it, or someone has. I don't know why I'm calling." I replayed it twice, not because the message was profound, but because it wasn't. It was vulnerable. It was unguarded. And it came without agenda. That alone made it feel like a miracle. The next morning, I went into the attic for the first time in years. The dust was thick, but the sunlight filtering through the slats gave it a golden kind of quiet. I opened an old cedar chest. Inside were Marianne's childhood things: a stuffed rabbit, a locket from Robert, a faded finger painting of our old house. I set them out gently on the floor, one by one. These weren't relics. They were anchors. Pieces of the girl she used to be, pieces of the mother I used to be, before years of bitterness calcified into distance. That night, I placed the locket in a small box, wrapped it in tissue paper, and sent it to her with no note. I didn't need to say anything. The gesture was enough. The next week, Janine Whitaker invited me for tea at the house. I hadn't stepped inside since the day I handed her the keys. But when I walked through the front door, the scent of fresh bread and lemon polish overwhelmed me. It was home. Not mine anymore, but still home in the way a place holds echoes. "We kept the porch swing," Janine said softly. "Steve re-stained it, said it deserved to shine again." We sat in the living room, the same room where Robert and I danced after putting Marianne to bed all those years ago. Janine poured tea. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Sometimes, the silence between women carries more weight than words ever could. Before I left, she handed me a small envelope. "She stopped by again," Janine said. "Didn't come in, but she left this." Inside was another photo, me holding baby Marianne in the garden, Robert smiling down at us. Written on the back in ink that had smudged ever so slightly. "I was proud once. I forgot. I'm trying to remember." The photograph sat on my kitchen table for hours. I didn't cry when I first saw it. There were no tears left for what had already been mourned. But I stared at it long enough to memorize every wrinkle in Robert's smile, every crease in my exhausted, joyful face as I held our daughter. That image, captured in a long-lost summer, reminded me that pride wasn't about ownership. It was about presence. Marianne hadn't asked for forgiveness, and that was okay. I wasn't looking for the grand apology. I had stopped needing her to validate the past. What I hoped for now was much simpler, that she would remember who we were, and maybe, just maybe, find her way back to that version of herself. The one who laughed with her father in the garden, who crawled into bed beside me after nightmares, who once believed that love didn't have to be earned. Eli showed up that evening, as he often did now, without fanfare. He placed a six-pack on the table, glanced at the photo, and nodded without needing to ask. "She's trying," I said. He poured us each a drink. Sometimes trying is the most honest thing a person can do. We drank in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but sacred. The kind that fills the cracks of old wounds with something softer than time. Later that week, I got another letter. This time it came with a return address. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore, but I want to. I'm not asking to undo what's been done. I just want to know if there's still a way back." I folded the letter carefully, not out of caution, but reverence. My fingers trembled slightly as I wrote my reply. "There's always a way back, but you have to walk, not demand. I'll meet you halfway." I sealed the envelope and walked to the mailbox under a sky filled with slow drifting clouds. No dramatic endings, no final confrontations, just two women, mother and daughter, learning how to begin again, slowly, honestly, and without illusion. As I walked back to the porch, Eli was waiting there with a grin. "Well," he said, raising a brow, "what now?" I sat beside him, exhaled the weight of years, and smiled. "Now," I said, "we let healing take its time." It rained the day her reply arrived, a soft, steady drizzle that turned the garden soil dark and rich, the kind Robert used to call a good omen for planting. I held the envelope with both hands, letting the paper soak in a little of that wet air before I opened it. Inside was a short letter and a small pressed daisy, flattened perfectly between wax paper. "Mom, I walked the old path today, the one behind the barn where we used to gather kindling. I don't know what I expected to feel. Shame, maybe. But what I felt most was distance. From you. From who I used to be. I want to close that space. If you'll have me." No promises, no drama, just longing. I kept that daisy in the kitchen window for days, watching it dry further in the morning light, its pale yellow petals curling slightly at the edges, like it, too, was remembering something softer. The following Sunday, I drove out to the edge of town where Marianne had moved with Ben. I didn't call first. I just brought a tin of lemon cookies and the hope that this time the door would open. It did. She stood there barefoot, hair undone, eyes tired but not guarded. She didn't smile, neither did I. But we looked at each other for a long moment, and something passed between us, something silent and sacred, like the sound of breath after a sob, the stillness after a storm. "I made tea," she said finally, stepping aside. Inside, her home was quiet, lived in, no decorators, no curated furniture, just mismatched cushions and a stack of children's books on the coffee table. I noticed Ben wasn't there. I didn't ask why. We sat. She poured the tea. For several minutes, we just sipped in silence. Then softly she said, "I was cruel." I didn't deny it. I didn't absolve it. Instead, I replied, "You were hurting." Marianne stared at the steam rising from her cup. I thought I could rewrite history, that if I controlled the house, I could rewrite what it meant. I didn't realize it was already written. In you, in Dad. In everything I was too proud to see. I reached across the table, placed my hand over hers. It's not too late to read it again. She swallowed hard, blinking fast. "I'm scared you won't trust me anymore." "I'm scared too," I admitted. But fear doesn't get the final word. Love does. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky had cleared just enough for light to filter in. It caught the side of her face, and for a second, I saw her as she was at 5 years old, mud-streaked, wild-haired, grinning as she offered me a bouquet of weeds and called it treasure. This quiet return was her bouquet now, and I was ready to accept it. Weeks passed, and Marianne and I began to talk again. Not every day and not always easily, but the doors were opening. Sometimes we spoke on the phone about simple things, a recipe she was trying, a strange noise in her attic, the dog she was thinking of adopting. But now and then, the deeper conversations found their way through. One afternoon, she asked if we could visit the house together. Not to take it back, she clarified quickly, just to remember it. I agreed. The following Saturday, we drove out to Saffron Hollow, where the Whitakers still lived. I had called ahead, and Janine greeted us warmly, as if this reunion had always been part of the plan. "Take all the time you need," she said, handing me the spare key. The moment Marianne stepped into the foyer, her breath hitched. The floors were different now, brighter wood, the walls a fresh shade of pale gray, but some things remained. The shape of the kitchen windows, the soft groan of the stairwell, the way the morning light filtered through the dining room blinds just the way it had when Robert read the Sunday paper. "I dreamed of this place for years," she whispered. "But in my dreams, I was always the owner, not the daughter." I nodded, my throat thick. "And in mine, I was always the mother, not the gatekeeper." We moved room to room in silence. In the hallway upstairs, she reached for a spot on the wall, once covered with her childhood drawings. The paint was new, but I could tell she still saw the memories beneath it. In the backyard, we sat on the old porch swing, lovingly restored by Steve. Marianne turned to me, tears in her eyes. "I don't expect you to forget everything, Mom. I know I made choices that hurt you." I reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, just like I used to when she was small. "I don't want to forget. That's how we remember why we fought so hard to find our way back." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a while we just rocked. The birds chirped in the distance. A breeze rustled the trees. It was the same view, but a different piece. "Do you think Dad would have forgiven me?" she asked quietly. I looked at her. He'd never have needed to. He'd have just opened the door. That was the truth of our family. We weren't built to be perfect. We were built to bend, to rebuild, to come back. As we left the house, Marianne stopped at the garden. She knelt beside a blooming peony and pressed her fingers into the soil. "Maybe I'll start my own garden," she said. "Plant things worth tending." I smiled. You've already started. Months passed, and the silence that had once filled the space between Marianne and me was replaced by something else. Not noise, but presence. Sometimes presence was enough. We didn't try to fix every wound or retrace every misstep. Instead, we built new routines, Sunday calls, shared recipes, long walks when she visited. The Whitakers invited us for lunch one autumn afternoon, and it felt less like a visit to strangers and more like returning to something sacred. Janine served soup from her mother's recipe, and we all sat around the old dining table, passing bread and stories as if time itself had softened its grip. After the meal, Janine led us into the living room and handed me a box. "We found this in the attic," she said. "Thought it belonged with you." Inside were forgotten pieces of our past. Robert's old fishing journal, a hand-knit scarf I made one winter, and a worn, leather-bound notebook filled with letters I'd written to myself in the first years after he passed. Notes of grief, hope, guilt, and love. I sat on the couch beside Marianne, flipping through the pages, letting each word rise from the ink like smoke from old fires. Marianne picked up a loose sheet, read a few lines, and then looked at me, her eyes glistening. "You've always carried more than I realized," she said. I smiled softly. "Mothers do." She squeezed my hand. "I wish I had seen it sooner. But you see it now," I said. "That's what matters." On the drive home, the road wound through fields, turning gold with the season's shift. Marianne rolled down her window, letting the wind tangle her hair like it used to when she was a child. "I think I understand now," she said, "why you sold the house. It wasn't about the land, it was about the line." "Yes," I replied, "a line between who we were and who we refused to become." She nodded. "Thank you for drawing it, even when it hurt." When we reached her home, she hugged me tightly at the curb. "Come inside?" "Not tonight," I said gently, "but soon." And as I drove away, I glanced in the rear-view mirror. Marianne stood on the sidewalk watching me, not as the woman who tried to take everything, but as the daughter learning how to return, one truth at a time. At home, I placed the leather notebook on my nightstand. It no longer felt like a vessel for sorrow. It felt like a monument to survival. And when the wind rustled outside and the porch creaked beneath the weight of time, I whispered a silent thanks to Robert, to the house, to boundaries, and to the quiet kind of love that doesn't shout but stays.